Peace to the family. All right, I'm enjoying my rainy Saturday evening here in Atlanta, Georgia tonight. I've been listening to what's been going on in the world today regarding Robert Francis Prevost, papally known as Leo the 14th. And before the white smoke came up, I had posted on a social media platform, African Pope, I'm asking for a friend. And before they went into the chapel, the Sistine Chapel, and told everybody to get out, one of my colleagues responded, "You know the answer to that." Well, I watched things play out, and they played out in such a way where the first American-born Pope was announced on May the 8th, 2025, right? So the whole notion of an African pope, of an African pope, is debatable. I'll get to that a little later in this video, but I want to talk about the lineage of the man Robert Francis Prevost, right? He was born in Chicago, Illinois, as reported by the major news carriers in the United States. Pope Leo the 14th, his family tree on his maternal side contained some African blood. Okay, his maternal grandparents' name are Joseph Martinez and Louise Piquet, right? They were classified as mulatto and black up until 1920, right? So in the 1887 census, a marriage document indicates that Joseph Martinez was born in Saint Domingue. At that time, that would have been the island of Saint Domingue and Hispaniola, which would be the Dominican Republic and Haiti, right? And his mother, Louise Piquet, was born in New Orleans, right? So we know and understand that since the Napoleonic Wars and the secession of the Union, Thomas Jefferson purchased the Louisiana Purchase, right? I have to fact check that one, but the Louisiana Purchase, which basically had a lot of members of the Caribbean island of Haiti come to what was known as the Louisiana Territory. And most of those people that came from that exodus from Haiti were Creolized people and members of a class of people known as Petit Blanche, right? The Petit Blanche were people who had ancestry with the local population of Africans and people that came from France and Germany, and they married into the aristocracy and the oligarchy in Haiti. These people known as the Petit Blanche, small whites, right? Not the big whites who were all of pure white extract, if there's a such thing as purity. But the system that evolved into it became known as the Creoles, the Octoroons, the Quatroons, the Dodecadentroons, and so forth, right? So the 1990 census identified Robert Francis Prevost's aunties, Irma and Mildred, as black, right? So in the 1920s, his family migrated to Chicago, and they were identified as white. This is a phenomenon in the African American community known as passing, right? This was when black people were so fair-skinned that they could pass for white. It's not an uncommon feature in the African American community, as it can be seen in the literature of African Americans. One of the first literary documents of African American people in the United States is a book from 1853 known as Clotel, or The President's Daughter, which was an allusion to the family of Thomas Jefferson and Sally Hemings. For those that are unfamiliar with that story, Sally Hemings was an African woman who had an affair with Thomas Jefferson, right? One of the founding fathers of the United States, right? And also a book that gives insight into that world of passing is the autobiography of an ex-colored man by James Weldon Johnson, who would later become the writer of the so-called Negro National Anthem, Lift Every Voice and Sing, right? Okay, so let's get back to this Catholic Church. There's a lot of misinformation in terms of Pope Leo XIV being the first African Pope, if Robert Francis Prevost, aka Leo XIV, self-identifies as being a black man, or an African American, or an African person. But historically, on the record, I'm going to have to flip back to my church history days and put on my church history hat and identify with one of my professors at the Interdenominational Theological Center, Professor Mark Ellingson. We got into it in Church History 1 and Church History 2, right? But I did learn a lot from this man. He was Yale graduate and church history professor at the ITC, right? I got into it big time with this guy. I'll talk a little bit about it later. But he wrote a book, Reclaiming Our Heritage, which is a text for Church History 1 and 2. There are two volumes of it. The man's name is Mark Ellingson, Markelleigsen. Guy from New York, Yale graduate, and Norwegian extract. All right. But there were documented 3 African popes. Pope Victor the First, from 189 to 199. Pope Maltildus, 311 to 314. Right? And Pope Gelasius, from 492 to 496. And these guys were from North Africa, the area of the Roman Empire that was the present-day countries of Libya, Algeria, and Tunisia. Right? But I also will say that Morocco was encompassed in that area as well as another one of the African saints of the Catholic Church, Saint Anthony of Padua. He ministered in Morocco. All right, so those are 3 established African popes of the Catholic Church, of the Roman Catholic Church. But also, you had popes in the Church of Alexandria. So you had Pope Cadron, Pope Avalasis of Alexandria, and Pope Anamusis of Egypt. Right? Sidebar. But this guy over in Russia, Vladimir Putin, over the past couple months, he has shown you pictures of Black Madonnas, right? We all know of the Black Madonna of Krakow, of Poland, all of these European works that portray Madonnas, which are photos of paintings of Mary and the infant Christ, right? In African portrayals, right? And also there's some pietas, which are pictures, either sculptures or paintings of Mary holding a dying Jesus, right? With African features, right? But a popular misnomer that I'm hearing people in their analysis, they're crediting Augustine of Hippo as being a pope. Augustine of Hippo is one of the African fathers of the Roman Catholic Church, right? Augustine of Hippo is famous for his work, The City of God, right? His works on grace and free will and God's nature, right? But also something that is not known about Augustine is Augustine would say that slavery, chattel slavery, was a result of sin, right? And people, when they talk about Augustine, they also talk about his mother, Monica, right? And I'm gonna touch back on some female heroines and martyrs of the early church of African origin in just a minute. But I want to finish naming these African fathers. Of course, there is Tertullian, who's famous for his notion of the term the Trinity, and sola scriptus, which is, typically by the book, right? He's the father of the liturgy of the Catholic Church being in Latin, right? We also have an early father of African origin, Origen. Origen is the father of systematic theology. He taught a lot with allegories, using unalike concepts to explain deep philosophical meanings. somewhat like a Gnostic. If I remember correctly, Origen was a lot into what developed into Gnosticism, right? There's Cyprian. Cyprian considered to be a martyr. He was martyred by one of the Roman emperors, right? There's Clement of Alexandria, right? And then there's Athanasius, who was the bishop of Alexandria from 293 to 273 AD. He affirmed the divinity of Christ in the Council of Nicaea, along with Eusebius of Caesarea and Eusebius of Nicomedia. These were Turkish guys from Turkey, right? But Athanasius is remembered because of a racial epitaph that was hurled at him of being a black dwarf, right? That's Athanasius, right? And the two, there are three African martyrs, female African martyrs of the church. That would be Felicity, and Perpetua, right? And Crispina. Perpetua was a noble woman, and Felicity was a slave girl. They were, if I remember the story correctly, one of them was had just given birth, and they were martyred for not renouncing their faith under persecution by the Romans, right? And Crispina, she was persecuted under the Emperor Diocletian, right? I wasn't asleep in church history class, and finally, it's something that I can talk about, right? So why all of the talk? The Catholic Church represents about 17% of the world's population. We talk about 1.2 to 1.4 billion persons in 2024 were baptized in the Catholic Church, right? Catholicism as a whole is on the rise by 1.15%, right? 64.2% of the Americas, and we're dealing with South America, is Catholic, right? And the fastest growing area of Catholicism is Africa, and it's at 3.31%, 3%, roughly 3% rise in Africa, 0.6% in Asia, 0.9% in the Americas, because they was born into Catholicism because of the Portuguese and the Spanish settling of the New World. Oceania is 1% of the world, right? So, as I stated earlier, we're talking about the doctrine of discovery, which basically gave the authorization from the Pope to Portugal and Spain at the time to go out and conquer people that were not Christians. This was after the Asiento, after they basically said that the Indians had souls. So they began to traveled to West Africa in the age of exploration, and they came into Africa, West Africa, and began a triangular trade of slavery, right? So the Dum Diverses, this was the papal bull in 1452 that basically legalized the buying and selling of African flesh and a human market for people, right? And this led to the doctrine of discovery, which said that they could go out into the world and, you know, do what they wanted to do. Okay, along with the Romanist pontifex, right? These are all papal bulls. So, but as always on my channel, I'm looking at this from the perspective of Mr. Neely Fuller's United Compensatory Code System Concept, a textbook for thought, speech, and action for victims of white supremacy, right? In the area, the 9 areas of people activity, and this one falling into religion, right? But those 9 areas of people activity are economics, education, entertainment, labor, law, politics, religion, sex, and war, right? In the code, the first thing is that we don't argue about religion because that person may or may not be what they say they are. They may say they're a Muslim and not a Muslim. May say they're a Christian and not a Christian. But we coming down to white supremacy. So if Pope Leo the 14th, if he goes back and opens up the discussion for reparations to those people that were affected by those doctrine of discovery, the Dum Diverses, and those things, that's a good thing, right? Let's deal with reparations for Haiti. Let's deal with reparations for African Americans. Let's deal with that debt of Haiti being wiped out, you know, from France, where one time they had a pope in France during the Avion papacy, right? So if Pope Leo is about restorative justice, I'm all for it. But if not, we have to bring him to task on his support of a institution that basically promoted white supremacy, right? I know I've tarried a bit on this subject, but it took me back to a place of church history where I was persecuted myself for fundamentally having an African theology, right? So, in short, I leave with this last thought. My first thought when the guy stepped out onto the balcony and was introduced to the world as the new pope, I looked at him. You know, of course, he appeared as a white man, looked like a white man. But then I looked at him, I said, there's something in this guy. He's not one of those white men. He's not a European American white man. He got something in his blood. And then it finally comes out a few days later that he does have something in his blood, some African blood in there. So I would say that that was the compromise that the Cardinals made because I was expecting to see either an African pope or a pope coming from Mesoamerica, being that these are the places where Catholicism is on the rise. Catholicism is basically dead in Europe by numbers. They're under 0% growth in Europe. Okay? So with that, if Pope Leo the XIV, if he fights against white supremacy and he's into restorative justice, bless him. And, I support him in his fight against white supremacy and counter-racist culture. But I also say this, is that in America, the reaction to the Pope being named because of his American nationality, all I heard was USA, 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 USA. And now, what do you hear? You hear these MAGA people almost losing their mind because the Papa is a black man. I think they were scared of those optics of a black man, of a dark sub-Saharan African, or even a darker indigenous looking person from South America, Mexico, Colombia, Brazil, being the Pope. I don't think they could take those optics, right? So back to the fight against white supremacy and counter-racism. If you lived a day without learning, then you didn't even live that day. With that, I say peace. I hope you subscribe, like the video, subscribe to my channel, and let's just keep it moving. Research those things, you know what I'm saying? In the days of artificial intelligence, it's very easy to research this stuff. When I was going to school, like I say, we read Clotel. We read the autobiography of Ex-Colored Man by James Weldon Johnson. Like I say, the early Antiochian fathers, Reclaiming Our History by Mark Ellenson. I had to read this stuff and search. Sleepless nights, you know what I'm saying, in these libraries, Robert Woodruff Library, Meharry Medical College Library, Tennessee State University Library, Emory University Library, to learn this stuff. And now it's right here at your hands. There's no need for you to be deceived about any of this stuff. Right? With that, I say peace.